The appointment was at 11 on a Friday morning, which struck Noelle as a particularly cruel scheduling choice. Fridays carried a collective sigh of relief in them, the weight of the week breaking, the brief brightness of 2 days in which the world's machinery paused. And people went to the farmer's market and made plans and drank wine with dinner because, why not? It's the weekend. Delivering terminal news on a Friday was, she thought, either a thoughtless act or a deliberate mercy. At least you had the weekend to fall apart before the world expected you to function again. She dressed for it the way she dressed for work, dark, practical, nothing that would require later attention to the condition it ended up in. Her black jeans, the charcoal sweater with the wide neck that she'd owned since she was 20, her mother's coat, because it was the heaviest one she owned, and the cold had been worse this morning, worse than any of the preceding days. Her fingertips white at the tips and slow to flush when she ran them under warm water. She braided her hair back. She looked at the 3 silver strands at her left temple in the bathroom mirror. She'd told herself yesterday that they might be stress-related, an anomaly. She'd told herself that with the particular conviction of someone who no longer believed what they were saying, but said it anyway, out of respect for the ritual of self-deception. She left the apartment at 10:15. Dr. Favre's practice was in a building that had been, in a previous life, a merchant's townhouse, handsome and slightly exhausted. 3 stories of gray stone with a brass plate beside the door. The waiting room had good light and bad magazines, and 3 other patients who each maintained the specific distance from each other that waiting rooms enforced. The polite fiction that proximity was not the same as company. Noelle took a chair by the window and watched the street. Blackthorn Cove on a Friday morning was a particular study in contrast. The fishermen coming in, the market vendors setting up, the school run threading between both with its noise and its forward motion. A gull sat on a van's roof and regarded everything with the magnificent indifference of something that had never once worried about what came next. She watched all of it and felt the cold move through her in long, slow contractions. Like a tide, she was learning to breathe through. The nurse was young and kind and called her by her last name off the chart.
Miss Storm, Dr. Favre is ready if you'll come with me, please.
Noelle followed the upbeat nurse as she bounced slightly down the corridor and thought, after this, I'll get a coffee from the place on the square, the one that does the good dark roast. I'll sit outside if it's not raining. Concrete plans, immediate, achievable, occupying the near future with texture so the far future didn't become the only thing in the room. Dr. Favre was waiting. He stood when she came in, a formality she'd never quite decided how to feel about. A lean man in his late 50s, silver hair, reading glasses on a cord around his neck, the careful, inhabited quality of someone who had been having difficult conversations for 30 years and hadn't yet found a way to make them easier, but had learned, at least, to be fully present inside them.
Noelle.
She noted the shift. First name. She sat.
Let's skip the prologue.
He almost smiled, sat down, opened the folder in front of him with both hands flat on the cover first, a small pause, the kind of gesture that serves as punctuation.
All right. The full panel results are back.
Noelle folded her hands in her lap. Her right thumbnail found the knuckle of her left index finger and pressed. A grounding technique. Feel something physical. Stay in the room.
The shadow sickness progression is further advanced than the preliminary results suggested. The soul coherence markers are at 43%. For reference, clinical threshold for symptomatic onset is typically 60%. Most patients in confirmed late stage present at 30 to 35.
So I'm between.
You're between, which means the deterioration has been ongoing for considerably longer than the last few weeks, possibly years. The shadow sickness can progress very slowly in its early phases, and the visual symptoms you've described,
Seeing the dead.
the perceptual experiences, yes, those may have been an early manifestation rather than a separate phenomenon.
He looked at her with the careful directness of someone who believed people deserved the truth, and found that belief difficult to sustain in practice.
It's possible the sickness has been with you since adolescence.
The room held that for a moment. Since adolescence. Since the first time she'd stood at her mother's bedside and seen the shimmer begin to gather above the hospital bed, and had thought, with the particular logic of a 16-year-old who had no framework for what she was seeing, that the air was simply strange in hospital rooms. Since every night shift that had ever felt too populated. Since all of it. All the years of her particular life that she'd arranged around what she'd thought was a quirk. How long? Favre was quiet for a long moment. Not the silence of evasion, she knew the difference by now. The silence of a careful man choosing the shape of an honest thing.
At current progression rate, without intervention, 6 to 9 months.
The window behind his desk showed a slice of sky, gray, tending toward blue at the edge, the particular specific blue that existed only at the edges of gray skies, as if color were trying to remember itself. 6 to 9 months.
Yes.
Not a year?
The preliminary estimate was more conservative. The full panel clarifies the picture.
Does anyone survive it? The silence this time was different.
No. Not in any documented case.
She nodded. She kept her hands folded in her lap. She could feel her heartbeat in her fingertips. An interesting physiological experience. Being able to feel your own heartbeat was usually a sign of adrenaline, the body ramping its systems in response to threat. She thought distantly that her body was paying attention to the situation, even if the rest of her hadn't caught up yet.
There is one additional finding.
Something in his tone made her look back at him.
These areas of increased activity are consistent with what we're calling threshold sensitivity. It's been documented in a small subset of shadow sickness patients, specifically those who report enhanced perception of entities associated with the transition between living and death states.
You're saying the ability to see souls is a symptom?
Or the condition was always there, and the shadow sickness is attracted to it. We're not certain of the directionality. What it means practically is that you're more permeable to the shadow realm than most patients, which accelerates the deterioration. But also,
He hesitated.
there's a hypothesis in the literature, unverified, that individuals with significant threshold sensitivity don't simply die of shadow sickness, that the process is more transitional than terminal.
Transitional?
As I said, it's unverified. I don't want to offer you false.
Transitional as in becoming part of it. He met her eyes.
Possibly. We don't know. It may be different.
The room was very still. She thought of Marina Voss, of the terror on Voss's Shimmer's face in the moments before the dark figure had reached for her. She thought of the reaching, not violent, not coercive, almost offered. And she thought of how Voss had reached back in the end, the ambivalence of it, the relief underneath the fear. She thought of the silver hairs at her temple. Thank you for telling me the truth.
Noelle, is there someone, family, or a partner?
No, but I have someone. I have a person.
Good. I'd like to see you every 2 weeks. The medication protocol.
Send it to the pharmacy. I'll pick it up.
Noelle.
I'm all right. I'm not going to do anything stupid. I know that's what you're worried about.
It's a consideration I'd be irresponsible not to have.
I'm not built that way.
I'm built the other way. I'll fight it past the point where fighting it makes sense.
He looked at her for a long moment, nodded. She walked out through the waiting room, past the good light and the bad magazines, and out through the brass-plated door into the Friday street. She made it to the square. She found the coffee place, the one with the good dark roast, and she ordered the largest size they offered, and she took it to the wooden bench outside under the bare-branched tree, and she sat down, and she waited to feel something. It took approximately 4 minutes. What came first was not grief. What came first was fury. It arrived without warning and without apology, the way all real anger arrived, not building, but simply present. Like a temperature change. Like the moment you walked out of a warm building into winter and the cold hit you all at once across the whole surface of your exposed skin. She sat on the bench with her coffee going cold between her hands, and she was furious. At the arbitrary cruelty of it. At the years of not knowing. At the possibility that she'd been carrying this her entire adult life. That all the years she'd spent building something careful and sustainable and functional had been spent on borrowed time she hadn't known was borrowed. She was furious at the sickness for having no reason. No smoking, no toxin exposure, no genetic marker. No logic. It had simply decided on her, the way weather decided. Randomly, without consultation, without the basic courtesy of a rationale. She was furious at her mother for dying first, and leaving her to do this without anyone who would have known exactly the right thing to say. Her mother had been frustrating and complicated and wrong about most of the things you could be wrong about while still being the only person in the world whose wrongness felt like home. And she had been dead for 8 years, and Noelle had done the work, had processed it, had grieved it properly and fully, and arrived on the other side still functional. She was furious to discover that the work had a flaw it hadn't told her about. She was furious at herself, briefly and intensely, for being 24 years old and not having done more, not having wanted more. For having lived so carefully, so compressed, so determined not to take up space or cost too much or need anything she wasn't certain would be given. She stopped that particular line and exhaled. She knew where it led. She'd been down it before. It didn't go anywhere useful. She breathed. The fury didn't leave. It rarely did, in her experience. Not immediately, not when it was justified. It settled. It arranged itself into something she could carry, something with handles, which was about the best you could ask of real. She called Gemma from the bench. Gemma answered on the second ring.
Hey, are you okay? How'd it go?
6 to 9 months.
A pause. Gemma processing the delta between what she'd hoped and what she'd been given.
Okay. Where are you?
The square, the coffee place.
Stay there. I'm on lunch in 40 minutes.
You don't have to.
Stay there, Noelle.
She stayed. Gemma arrived in 35 minutes with a paper bag from the bakery 2 blocks over and the particular focused energy of someone who had decided that the shape of the next 2 hours was going to be manageable things. She sat down, handed Noelle a croissant she hadn't known she wanted, and said nothing immediately, which was one of Gemma's great skills, the ability to inhabit silence without filling it, and without making the silence awkward by performing her comfort with it. They sat for a while and ate.
I looked into the clinical trial in Boston. The eligibility criteria.
Gemma.
I know what you're going to say.
Do you?
You told me the number.
I'm telling you things. I decided to stop not telling people things.
Gemma was quiet for a moment.
43%.
43.
And the threshold, whatever that means.
It means I've been seeing dead people since I was a teenager, and it's not a quirk. It's a symptom, or it's a cause, or they're not sure which.
She watched the gull make its final move on the pastry.
Or neither. They think the shadow sickness might work differently on people like me. That dying might work differently.
What does that mean?
They don't know. Unverified hypothesis. Transitional rather than terminal. That's how Favre put it.
Transitional,
Yes,
as in becoming part of the shadow realm.
possibly.
Gemma was quiet for a moment that was longer than her usual pauses. Then,
Is that better or worse?
I have no idea. I genuinely have no idea.
they sat with that.
I don't want you to die.
It was simple and true, and it landed in Noelle's chest with the particular weight of simple, true things. Heavier than complex ones, because there was nothing to argue with in them.
I know.
I'm allowed to be angry about it.
You're absolutely allowed.
And scared.
Yes.
Gemma's jaw worked. She looked out at the street. Noelle let her look. Let her do whatever she needed to do inside the architecture of the next few seconds. The frost under Gemma's eyes was the specific topography of someone trying very hard not to cry in public out of respect for the person they were trying not to cry for.
Okay. Here's what we're going to do. You're going to keep going to Favre every 2 weeks. You're going to take the medication. You're going to eat actual food and sleep. And you're going to tell me when things get worse, instead of 6 weeks after things get worse.
She turned back. Her eyes were clear.
And I'm going to look for anything that isn't the standard protocol. Alternatives, experimental approaches, whatever is out there. I don't care how fringe. I'm looking.
Gemma.
I'm looking, Noelle. You can't stop me from looking.
There was such iron in it, such refusal. It moved through Noelle in a wave that was not grief and not gratitude, but something that contained both. Something that didn't have a name yet, because languages were built by people who survived things, and some things were still too close to be named.
Okay. Look.
Thank you.
A beat. The sound of the square around them. Distant voices. Market move. She walked home through the market on purpose, which she didn't usually do. She walked slowly. She bought a bag of blood oranges from a vendor she recognized by face but not by name, a woman of about 60 with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had sold fruit in the same spot for 20 years and intended to sell it there for 20 more. She walked through the noise and the color and the relentless forward motion of the market, and she looked at all of it. She had been moving through Blackthorn Cove for 6 years with the particular half-presence of someone with places to be. And before that, she'd moved through it with the particular half-absence of someone grieving. And before that, she'd been young, and it had been background. She had not, she realized, been looking at it. Not as something that might have a last time. The fish stall, with its arranged silver bodies and its smell of deep ocean and ice. The textile vendor, with bolts of thick wool in colors that only existed properly in Atlantic winter light. A blue that was almost green, a red that was almost brown. The baker with the door wedged open, the heat and the yeast smell tumbling out into the cold. 2 children chasing each other between the stalls while their parent pretended not to see. A dog on a leash who watched the children with the profound yearning of a creature whose leash was the only thing between it and its purpose. She looked at all of it and felt the fury and the grief, and under both of them, very deep, very still, something that was none of those things. A kind of refusal. Not denial, not bargaining. Something older and less reasoned than that. The kind of refusal that didn't argue with reality, that didn't need to. The kind that simply existed as a fact, the way the ocean existed below the surface of the wind that disturbed it. undetached and immovable. Not yet. She stopped walking. She was at the edge of the market, where it gave way to the harbor road, and the water was visible today, gray and green and vast. The horizon hidden in cloud, but the distance palpable. The sense of enormous depth, just there, just beyond the ordinary afternoon. The cold moved through her in its slow tide. She thought about calling out again, thought about whether it was foolish, about whether foolish was a category that still applied to her particular situation. She thought about Marina Voss reaching for the dark. She was not ready to reach, but she was starting, in the carefully excavated space beneath the fury and the grief, to understand that she might have to. That whatever was circling her was not random and not indifferent, and had been, in some manner she didn't yet have language for, waiting for her specifically. And that waiting was a form of patience. And patience was a form of want. She didn't know yet what it wanted. She intended to find out before it found her first. That night, the cold went still. Not gone, not even less, but still, the way water went still before something moved through it from underneath. She lay in the dark of her apartment, lights out, listening. The usual whispers at the threshold of sleep never came. Instead, there was a silence that was itself full, charged and expectant, the silence of an inhale before the word. She waited. Nothing moved. Nothing spoke. Eventually, she slept. And for the first time in 2 weeks, she didn't dream. She would realize days later that this was not inactivity on the part of whatever watched her. It was preparation.